From the southernmost point of Dorne to the lands of always winter, what is west of west and the shadows in the east, this is Casterly Talk and a live recording again of the podcast, episode 57. And I'm so happy to be joined today by one of the mainstays around here, the gentleman who named this fine show. Please welcome back to the show, Lon Harris.
Hey, great to be back. From my house into Casterly Talk. It's great to be back.
Good to be here with you, sir. Taco, I'm sure, might make an appearance.
Oh, probably. He's right here.
Yeah. Look, we appreciate all of you watching live here on YouTube. This is a audio, this is a recording of our audio podcast, but why not put it live on YouTube? Everyone's kind of, doing it these days. And so bear with us if there's any hiccups. Everyone in the world is either streaming or on the internet. So I know Lon and I have both experienced dropouts even today, getting ready for the show or in the past. So please bear with us if something should happen. Lon Harris, I guess we should always do the check-in on you and Taco's mental health. How's everything going over there in House Harris?
We're doing all right. It's great to have a quarantine buddy. I live alone, so it would probably be very lonely without someone. I recommend if you are living alone, foster a shelter dog, adopt a shelter dog.
There you go.
Perfect time to do that, and it's nice that it's an excuse to go out every once in a while and take a walk.
Right.
It's someone to talk to, so I don't feel like I'm just talking to myself like a crazy person. It's been nice.
Yeah. Oh, the conversations with animals have been key to Grace and I's mental health as well. I mean, let's be honest. We're always going to be talking to the dogs, but now it takes on even much more importance.
Yeah, I'm glad the neighbors know that I have a dog, because otherwise it would just sound like all day me just having conversations, singing to myself.
There goes Uncle Lon singing to
Don't worry about Lon. They say, from 3 to 4, he always likes to sing.
That's what he does. Lon Harris and I here to talk about everything in the world of ice and fire. We got some people watching, like a Cinefan saying, woohoo, another live Casterly Talk. We got Eddie in there. Eddie's got a big question about plot holes we'll try to get to here. Kristen McGee is very happy to see Lon here. And also Kristen McGee says, I think my dog is sick of me. That might be a little problem down the line too. The dog's like, could you go outside, take yourself for a walk?
Yeah, they're used to alone time during the day, and this is like we're throwing off their whole schedule as well. So yeah, no, there are definitely times when like you get that they're sleeping and then they kind of do that head pickup, and it's like, oh, you're still here? All right. Like I'm gonna root around through your stuff and try to eat the trash, but all right, if you're here, we'll keep napping.
I'll play it cool. Zach Anderson is here as well. Says it's been too long since I've heard Lon's beautiful voice. Yes, indeed.
The dulcet tones.
Yeah. Lon Harris. So one of the interesting things I want to discuss with you on this episode, Lon, since last time you've been on in a regular capacity, you've started reading the books, and that's quite a daunting task. And every time I see you at the Schmodown, I check in on you. And you'd be like, hey, look, man, I through 200 pages of food descriptions.
Let's be fair. It's not that daunting. I'm being slow. Like I am going slow. I found it hard to really focus on it's not often during the quarantine where I'm like, let me crack open a tome. I feel like losing myself in great literature. Like that's not, it's usually more like, oh, there's new Nailed It's on Netflix. Like my brain's just not. I also thought I was going to try to get like writing stuff done. And like, as soon as I wrap up the things I really have to do for the day, all I want to do is just kind of lie on the couch. I want to play a little Animal Crossing, maybe.
Get your bell.
I'm earning my miles and my bells.
I love those bells. But you have finished the first book, right?
I finally made it through, and I'm a good, I would say, almost halfway through Clash of Kings. So we're progressing.
This is the discussion I've always been excited to have with you, because I've said before, but when you and I started working together and producing the Watch and Thrones over on Screen Junkies Plus, I was just bowled away, not surprised because I knew you enough by then, but just bowled over by the amount of knowledge you had for this world, not just the show, but the world. And you hadn't even touched the books yet, which to me, I was always like, here's proof you can pay attention to the names on the show and it's not confusing. Lon's deep into it.
you do have to watch multiple times, as I've always said. The first time through, it's so much, it's too much. You're just trying to follow the drama
Yeah.
and the big picture stuff. So it was the second viewing through the whole show where I already kind of knew where it was going, so I knew what was going to be important, and I
Right.
knew like, oh, okay, like Sir Barristan Selmy is always the example I go back to. Like you can follow that thread on TV. It's there. It's just background. And until he's dead, you don't like, oh, I wish I knew that character's journey. But then you can go back and follow it, and it is in there. So, it really, a lot of that stuff comes out of multiple viewings.
Well, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and then you go back to read the book, and there's just a lot more of that there. Like it's weird. They add a lot of connecting tissue that gets them out of cutting like whole large groups of stories. You know, like that's
right.
Like it wasn't. I don't feel like they add stuff a lot just to add it. It's like they're clearly like, well, if we add this one scene, it'll cover for these 50 pages.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, I especially feel early on that's a lot of that stuff is there. So overall, what's your thought? Finally diving into these books, other than hey, George gave us a great big world. Where are you at with it?
I mean, honestly, and I don't mean this in terms of like he's a great writer. I like his prose. It's not a knock on the books or the writing, but it is. I've never done this before where I've gotten to know a world so well from one media and then like gone back. There is. I do have to sort of like push through it sometimes because there is sort of a feeling of like I'm so far ahead of the narrators. Like Bran is telling me the story, and I'm like, oh, Bran, you sweet summer child. You don't know. So it is odd to attack it in that way.
Yeah.
Just because I feel like they're catching up to me rather than the other. It's weird to have somebody tell you a story and you're like, yeah, I know this part. Like I'm constantly in that like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. All right. It wasn't.
Yeah,
it wasn't Tyrion's dagger or Peter Baelish. You're lying.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I experienced that when I finally had kind of caught up. Because I was show first, and then went into the books, and like you're like me too. Once we're in, and we're looking at maps and all that kind of thing. But I remember getting through, like Storm of Swords is probably, I'd say, my favorite of the books, and that's favorite for a lot of people. I kind of got bored halfway through because I hadn't got to the Red Wedding yet, and I was just kind of like, can we get to it? Can we get to it? And then I don't know, just something clicked in. I was like, oh, okay. Then I got ahead of the show, and it kind of opened up again. But you're in a different spot. The show's done. So
yeah, I mean, I know basically where George is thinking the whole thing ends up from the jump. So like, yeah, literally I'm reading, about Waymar Royce and encountering the others. I already know what happens to like the Night King. Like, like it's so there is it's like I said, it's not a criticism. I don't mean it that way. Because obviously this is where it all comes from. But it is I can't help but feel that way as I read.
And you're picturing the actors, you're hearing the actors,
well,
and
that's another thing I was going to talk about is that
please.
The age differences. I'm basically like I find myself forgetting about where I'll constantly be like, oh right, she's only like 9 because I'm picturing the actors who were aged up for the show, and they had to like that's. Couldn't do the show they did with young actors the ages as described. Like it wouldn't work at all.
Yeah, especially like I get because like even Ned is what 35 or something, and all right, that tracks. You start having kids a lot younger in this world, whatever it is, based on medieval times. I get it. But I'm even surprised that George, some of the dialogue he's given like 3-year-olds.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, that's the other thing too, is that Bran is like what 3 at the beginning, 4. It's like you're knocking this 4-year-old out of a window. Like it's so different. And I know it's only a span of a few years, but when you're that age, it's so different to be, like a boy, but like an 8-9-year-old boy versus like a toddler.
And Arya being younger too, and all of them being younger. And I get why I get his timeline, but like have like a 7-year-old given like a soliloquy in a monologue.
Like Robb Stark going from like 14 to 17 is a huge jump, and the actor playing like he looks older anyway.
Right.
Like they're supposed to be 17, 18 in the pilot, but Madden and Kit
Yeah.
Harington looked older anyway. So, you know.
Well, and especially some of the stuff with Danny being 13. I imagine it was a
Right.
pretty easy decision at HBO to be like, yeah, we're gonna make her older.
Yeah, I mean, already the like, you know, she falls in love with Khal Drogo is already, it's still awkward in the show. Imagine if she was much younger, it would be
Well, it changes.
unfilmable in that
Yeah.
context.
And again, I'm not. I love these books, so I hope no one's thinking we're knocking it. But just like it's hard, not because of the show, and me being such a fan of Jorah, and especially some later stuff in the other
Right.
books with
Yeah.
Jorah and Danny. I'm just like, oh yeah, Jorah, no,
Right.
man.
I mean, it's already May, December, regardless in the TV show, but then it becomes like February, December. It's like you gotta stop
Yeah.
this.
Live comment in the YouTube chat from Donald Long. Yeah, the stuff with Daenerys in the books had me like, okay, George, calm down. Yeah.
Right, because it's already questionable in the HBO version, and that's them fixing it. That's them going like, "Whoa, George, all right, we're gonna tweak this stuff."
Yeah. But anything specific, anything that's because I think season 1 and book 1 are very easily, the most similar. I think even though the show does depart very early
Yes,
on, much more than people even remember, it's the most similar. Is there anything in the book
I
that you're
have
like, translate it over?
two 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 things that were just very different for me, just how they landed on me. One
Right.
was in the book when Jon arrives at the wall. My like in the show, it sort of feels like, oh, for generations now they haven't been taking the wall seriously. Like nobody
Right.
believes in White Walkers anymore. Nobody believes in whites anymore.
Right.
That's why all these castles are sort of abandoned, and it's just kind of criminals now. In the book, it feels like that's more like recent, and I'm not sure. I feel
Oh,
like that might be because we're seeing it through Jon's perspective, and so to him, it's like the wall is supposed to be like this. Why is it in shambles now? So, like, I don't know if that's like the show. We're seeing this omniscient, like here's what it's like, and so I feel
right.
like that might be the difference just in how we're being told the story. But I thought that was really interesting to me, that it felt like they made a decision to make it more like it's kind of always been this way around the wall for at least a few hundred years at this point, to sort of
Yeah.
stress how the civilization has moved beyond being scared of the North.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah, it's and even again, some of the George just does such a good job playing with the unreliable narrators or the
Right.
myths and legends fueling what you think in the show, in the story. So yeah, that's kind of
Yeah,
apparent.
I did kind of feel like that could just be good character work in terms of establishing Jon and who he is. And he's got this kind of naive, he goes up to the wall in this kind of naive mindset of they're heroes in the Night's Watch. And like it's like a noble thing. He doesn't become, cynical about it until later.
Yeah.
It took me forever to figure out that Robert Aaron was Robin Aaron. I kept feeling like, is this an older brother? Are we not hearing about him? And then they referenced that his nickname is Sweet Robin, and I was
Right.
like, oh, okay, same guy. They just changed the name. And I feel like they must have done that because they thought we were gonna, like, in the book he's named after Robert Baratheon,
Right.
and I feel like they thought we were gonna get mixed up. Like people would talk about Robert, and we wouldn't know if they meant Robert Aaron or Robert Baratheon.
Yeah.
But anyway,
What
weird change. Took me a while to wrap my head around that.
I love that because George is unapologetic about those names, and especially in Fire and Blood, I love that book, and I'm about to maybe start doing a reread or a poke through at some of my favorite parts. But yeah, even then, as I'm reading it, I'm like, George, just give me another name that starts with.
Yeah, like if you were alive in the Middle Ages, you probably did know a few Roberts, but like I get why they made that change of the show. It was just weird for me. And then the last thing, and this was really, I
Yeah.
think this is the biggest surprise I had, or thing that I felt was really different about the first book, was Catelyn Stark. Like
Oh,
the
great.
the whole the character as conceived. And again, I don't mean this is a criticism of either version. Like I get that they're different, and I think Michelle Fairley does she's great. Like it's a great version of the character. But in the book, her character is like down to play the Game of Thrones, like pretty much from the jump. Like she's political. She's like encouraging him to go to the capital, and like seeing the advantages for the Starks in these moves. And in the show, she's 100% just like, no, it's our family, and we've got to protect our family, and you shouldn't go, and it's dangerous. And and I get that, they in TV you kind of need to have that conflict, especially in the pilot. Like, there's got to be something that's keeping him from feeling like he just wants to go to King's Landing. That's the dramatic incident.
Yeah.
But it does feel like it really changes, it shifts that whole character, and she does. It feels like she's a little more complex in the books.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's one that's not talked about if you've experienced both forms of the story. And yeah, much like you, I understand that there's just a simple through line of family first for Catelyn, and everything she does on the show is to protect the family all the way up to the very end of her life. But yeah, there's that great. It is a great moment because in the show, it's like they talk. Even the producers talk about it. It's Devil Angel. It's Maester Lewin and Catelyn on the shoulder of Ned, kind of like,
right.
Do you go down? And yeah, you forget in the book. She's like, get down there.
And that's like if you wrote a TV pilot and the big thing was like, you got to come with me to King's Landing, and there wasn't a character being like, don't go. That would be the note you'd get back. It's like somebody should say, don't go, and so there's an obstacle there. Right. So I get it. But it does feel like, and I don't, it's not this bad, but like there's a lot of movies that do the Anne Heche character from Donnie Brasco, the wife whose whole job is to be in the kitchen, like, you're always working, you're missing the kid's childhood, like that. Yeah. It's such a trope. And like they do kind of, Catelyn in some of the early Game of Thrones episodes kind of fills that role instead of being this more robust 3-dimensional character that George R. R. Martin was writing.
Well, I again, to not to spend the whole show on this, I love what you're saying because I've changed. I've even publicly kind of apologized to Catelyn Stark, the character on the show, because early on, especially in the early days of discussing this stuff online or in media, digital media, where we were a little less careful with our words when we were doing our pontificating and punditing. I felt it was really tough on Catelyn Stark. Say, all this is your fault. You did this, you idiot. You made some mistakes, and then to pull back and just say like that's not fair. This is but I think that goes back to what you're saying about early season 1. Michelle Fairley plays her so well and brings so much depth to it but I wasn't looking at that. I was looking at what you're describing of the we gotta just hunker down in our castle. Right. And I'm paraphrasing the entire arc, but
and that is who she is kind of in the show. It's like the family first, and that's your duty, is to keep the Stark safe or whatever. And it's just interesting that it's this shift in the book that she's more of like a maybe a little Machiavellian, but she's thinking 3 steps ahead in the book, and she's thinking about not just their personal safety, but the esteem of the family, like everybody else is.
I think it's a great point, man. Great observations. Is why I wanted to have this conversation with you. Any other big revelations or anything that you can recall from the first book?
That's what I've got sort of in my notes. I mean, it is interesting that you think of the show is so propulsive. I mean, it's so chock full of narrative that it's nice when you're reading the books that he'll take a digression. Like he's not George R. R. Martin does not feel like he's like a runaway train of plot hurtling towards the finish line quite like the shows do, especially in the later seasons.
Yeah.
He feels like he's just hanging out in Westeros, and if you want to come along with him, like let's go for a little ride around the King's Road,
A great way to look at it, and I'm this is where we'll check in 10 years when you finish the first 5 books. Because he does. I always say, especially later on, maybe an editor or two could have stood up to George a little bit later, but I do like how you're describing that. This book knows it has no timeline, it has no deadline.
And I like that. It has that feeling of there's that there's more to come. It's not. It doesn't end in a way where it's like, and the Westeros was safe. That it's part of an ongoing series, but it doesn't feel like incomplete without the next chapter. It feels sort of like a window into this world and all of these lives. And there's dramatic stuff happening, but it's not every day they're only thinking about it. Like some days they're thinking about a delicious eel pie,
many eel pies to be had in the books.
Eel pies consumed.
And you said you're good ways into Clash of Kings?
Yeah, like a few hundred pages into that one, sure.
Will you be done with another book, but you're only like a third of the way through this one?
I'm reading them at the pace George is writing them. Let's put it that way.
I'd be very.
A new one ready. Maybe I'll be ready.
We can hope. I definitely want to even off air be checking in with you as you get farther along in Clash of Kings. I still feel Clash of Kings is a spectacular book, but that the show had that chance to go through and pluck the important things out and make it kind of a better kind of just smoother story for me. But that's where it starts to kind of change. But again, there's some great stuff in that second book. I'm like, I kind of feel better knowing this, and maybe could have seen it, but I get why it wasn't happen, which is again part of the fun of this. I think these two forms of the story can totally exist in separate little sections of our minds, but that's where it starts to get really interesting, I think, with some of George's work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too in that, book one really is like very much, it's sort of all except, there's the Daenerys chapter, whatever. But like almost everything is sort of just King's Landing, Winterfell, and the road in between. And so, like there's a little bit, you get a little bit of Renly going to Highgarden, but like suggested, like described to you, you're not there. And so that's interesting too, in that you're like, I have this grander perspective of this whole world, but the readers knew mostly about King's Landing and Winterfell at that point.
And
what did they know of Bravos?
Bravos, and I love too looking at the maps in the front of the book, how each book more starts getting added in until you got
You're broad. I mean, this is mostly Starks talking in this one, so you got a
nice little touch.
Broaden your perspective over time.
We are going to jump into a discussion about the show. And on last week's live show, which featured Andres Cabrera, Thomas Rissling, we got a great call from one of our regular listeners, just an out-and-out contributor to the show at this point, Eric Monroe, who I believe is watching live, but said he's cooking and listening. So it's good. Last week, he asked us, Lon, about our favorite first scene of every season. And I got to admit, on air, because I just kind of ran into it on air, I drew a blank on even a couple of seasons. It's first of all, it's getting to that point, Lon, where we're all going to just have to rewatch again because some details are fudging in my brain.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm probably getting ready for some, like, obviously before any new show or whatever, I'll have to do a rewatch. But yeah, I'm already starting to blank out on some stuff, or like what happened, what season is starting to get fuzzy. Whereas you remember when the show first ended, I was like right on top of all that stuff.
Yeah. You can actually with the best of them right after it's all done. Yeah. So in that spirit, Eric called back, and we're going to play this call right now from our friend Eric Monroe. The opposite end, what is our favorite final scene?
Hey, Ken, Casterly Talk. So kind of the opposite of the question I asked last week. So this week, what do you think was the best last final shot to a season, the last scene that we saw? And there's a lot of great choices. There's the wall finally coming down in season 7. There's Dany with her whole army finally sailing toward Westeros in season 6, Jon dying in season 5. Season 2 had a great one, Sam seeing the White Walker army, but I have to go with season 1. Dany emerging with the dragons, by far one of the best scenes of the entire series. It was absolutely amazing seeing the dragons, seeing Jordan Neal. It was just absolutely amazing. So what was your favorite final scene to a season?
All right. Lon, to help us, we kind of, before we went there, just so you and I don't look like we've never watched the show, we just kind of made a little list. So here's the choices that we have for this. Is the final scenes, shots, but final sequences of each season. Season 1, we got Dany getting her dragons, emerging from the fire. We got season 2, the 3 horns. We got that third horn blowing, and we got the whites showing up, heading toward the first of the fist of the firstman. Season 3, we end with the Misa, the big scene there. Season 4, Arya heading to Bravos. No Lady Stoneheart showing up there. That's how it ends. Season 5, as Eric mentioned, Jon Snow, he's dead. Season 6, Dany and the army heading to Westeros. That's going to be an easy victory, right? Season 7, the wall comes down, and the season 8, the show ends with Jon Snow, as I say, Jon into the woods. Jon Snow heading back, kind of full circle with the show there. So those are some of our choices. What do you think for the best final scene shot sequence of the show or each season?
I mean, I agree with a lot of what Eric was saying. I think that season 1, that first indication, like having not read the books, I didn't know that was necessarily coming with the dragons coming back, and it's a great moment. It looks great. Like the effects are really good and it's well shot. It's a great moment. But I keep coming back to, I think season it's the 4. No, 5 with Dany and her. No, it's 6. Dany and her army. I knew I was going to do that.
Yeah.
It's the end of season 6 with Dany and the Dothraki on the boats heading to Westeros. To me, that's the culmination of the whole show, really, up to that point. We've always been building up to eventually the Targaryens are going to come back and we're going to have this final fight for supremacy of Westeros, and it's finally happening. And honestly, I think that it's so good, the lead up to that sequence, that's why I think a lot of people maybe felt disappointed by what came after. Like, such amazing build up. And then we get, a few battles. It's cool. There is a lot of good stuff to come in season 7 and 8. But I don't know if what we got, the payoff is equal to the sort of grand 6-season setup that we'd had for that culminates in that moment of, we've been told over and over again, the horse lords don't sail over water. They won't get anything. Then we see it finally happening. Dragons overhead. It's like the full force of Dany's army is amassed finally.
Yeah.
In that big moment.
I think that's a great point about that. Again, no matter what you love or don't like about season 7 or 8, if you're listening or watching, like, great things came after, big questions came after, all those things. I think you're right. We always talk about these expectations. When expectations are built, that's why I love that Mandalorian season 1 was just loved all across the board. But I bet you season 2, you're going to start seeing people be a little disappointed, no matter what the quality of the show is, because now you have expectations. And you're so right that all the ships sailing. I remember a friend of mine who's not super into the show, but he kind of saw it and he texted me and he's like, "But I don't understand, man. Like, she's clearly going to go win." And I was like, "Well, something's got to happen. That can't be what happened, right?"
The end of the show is not going to be like, "We win."
Yeah. So it does create this big, like, oh no, and then her fall, her destruction, the losses, and season 7, you're right. Victorian Greyjoy just kind of comes in. The battle was maybe underwhelming to some people. Some people really liked it. I can get behind that. Yeah, that it kind of created some heavy expectations, but it was great.
It's not the final scene, but I think one of my favorite finale moments too is Tyrion. I think this is the finale. It's Tyrion seeing Shay, killing Shay, and then killing his father, and then getting the hell out of King's Landing. Like that's not the actual final beat of that episode, but it's a great closeout to that storyline.
And that's a great almost sub question that, because it's like, that's season 4. And I enjoy the false ending of season 2, which is Dany gets out of the house of the Undying, has the visions, and then they Zaro, Zohan, Doxus, and Dorea are locked away. And then I love when they're pillaging, and you got Jorah like, "Take all you want, we're going." And then it goes down into what I still think might be my favorite ending. And we'll talk about all of them, but season 2, the third horn blowing, it was like a horror movie to me, because they done such a good job of setting it up with exposition and Sam blinking his eyes. And, well, I read it in a book, a third horn is the White Walkers. And it was so in the back of my mind. And then I'm seeing Dany and the ships, and whoa, God, Dany's getting a ship and she's going to go forth. And then suddenly all of a sudden it fades out and fades back into them digging in the snow. And I remember thinking, what the hell's going on here? We just got a soft ending of the 3 guys cleaning up poop, to burn. And that third horn hit, and I just got chills all over my body watching. I was like, oh no. So that one probably grabbed me in the most, though.
Yeah, it's shocking. The show hasn't. I mean, it opens with kind of a horror type scene, but they really weren't leaning that far into the horror in the early episodes. It's sort of later, hard home and whatever, where it became more like there could be zombies in this show, you guys. But at this point, it was much more subdued. So that moment is like very chilling and unsettling.
Yeah, but again, then that creates a year of expectations that it's all wrapped up in that great cold opening, which I talked about last week. I love Jorah Mormont saying, "We got to get back to the wall, or everyone you've ever known will be dead." Like, I love that. Yeah. But even then, Some people have some great comments in the live chat here, but the Jon Snow one in season 5, him dying, was a weird thing because the book we still haven't gone past that. So there was this, well, maybe George could have killed him, but I never thought at any point the Kit Harington hair watch. I never bought into the fact that he wasn't coming back in some way, but I have to separate that and say that was a pretty good, brave ending of season 5. John bleeding out.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that it's hard for us sometimes as very online people who keep up with everything going on and who watch every after show and are on social media, whatever. Like, I feel like if you were just a random TV watching person, you might not necessarily be tipped off that, like, oh, he's definitely coming back. Like, I think that moment might legitimately have some shock value that we are so cynical and follow this stuff so closely, that we don't experience.
I mean, I love that. I love that those viewers could still exist, because sometimes
I hope they do. I think they do.
What's like I always say back, like if I was doing the Force Center podcast back in the early 80s and it was 81, 82 and we're leading up to Jedi, I'd be like, well, did you hear Harrison didn't sign a contract for the 3rd movie? And then you would get bogged down in that and just not experience the story. So sometimes that's refreshing. But worse stuff. We're too far down the path, Lon.
Yeah, no, it's too late for me. But I feel like for a lot of other people, they're experiencing this media like very differently than I am. Like, I feel like there were people who went to see Rise of Skywalker who were probably like, "Wait, the Emperor's back?" Like, that happened to somebody. Somebody had that experience, not me.
My father, I think one of them. Famously, my father said at the end of episode 7, he called me and goes, "I think they're leaving it open to more films." Yes, Dad. Here's some comments live. Donald Long says, for a person who was show first, it's John's death. It was the only, oh God, no death in the series that got me, plus the whole year of how he'll come back, which led me to the book. So yeah, so Donald Long talking about what we're saying, like, you just don't know. This show has shown, if Sean Bean could be killed off, I mean, that never happens. If he's gone, maybe Kit Harington's not coming back.
Yeah, no, I think it's reasonable for somebody who was just experiencing the show as a show and not an online phenomenon. They probably believed that there was a chance Jon Snow was really dead.
Yeah, and I love Alden Diaz, who calls in the show often here. Alden's a great guy. I remember talking to friends about how the blood pouring out of Jon's body and onto the snow was kind of shaped like a wolf howling, and that's how desperate I was for hope at the moment, which I both love. And then sometimes we all have a good laugh about how we look into, wait, is the pommel on the sword, is it thinking, is it alive? So there's a lot of those kind of things but it's part of the fun, right?
Yeah, we used to get really lost in the weeds on some of that stuff. But that's part of the fun.
And this one here, I want to talk about the end of season 7, talking about expectations, Lon. The scene that stays with me from all of GOT is the Night King riding the dragons. He breathes blue flames, frost fires, we said on the show back in the day, and then all of them walking out of the wall. So I really do love that moment, because for me, it was like, this is something we've been thinking since almost the beginning, right? That wall has got to come down. Like, they're talking about it too much. It's too important. Like, at some point, and so when it finally happened, I still think there was some reactions, general reactions. This is very generalized, of just people saying, "Yeah, I guess the wall came down." Is that what? But I think it just kind of gets overlooked because it was such a big moment that we were expecting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's there's the, we've been building up to somehow Dany's going to get this army together and go to Westeros, but you're not exactly sure how it happened. And then there's I think that's a case of a lot of the hardcore fans figuring things out ahead of time and then dampening the moment. Like, by that point, we'd had a year of people on the internet being like, ice dragon, it's good, like all their theories about what was going to happen and where it was going to come from and so I think the moment that you saw them bring the dragon back as an ice dragon, when we saw that blue eye open at the end of that episode, I think already people had started to put this together, like, that's the dragon that's going to fly and bring down the wall, and so I think it's a great moment. It's really cool. I think that's a case where, you can figure some of this stuff out. I mean, stories are logical. And so there's only ever so many logical things that can happen. And if you try to figure out what each of them are, you probably can. Like George R. R. Martin's a very good writer and a brilliant guy, but he's not, magic. He can't make a plot point that you couldn't guess.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think that if you put your mind to it, a lot of people sort of just jump the gun and figured that moment out. Whereas if you were just a person who watched it like most people watch TV, you're like, oh crap, that's awesome.
That's it's a couple reactions to that. Lone Wolfpack follows up to his own point there. It was expected, Ken, but the sheer execution of it was purely beautiful and eerie at the same time. I love that. And I'm like that too. Yeah, where sometimes the story, as Lon's kind of describing here, the story is the story. I want to engage with the story presented, and I want to be just pulled into that moment, whether or not I predicted it 4 years ago or not, or whatever. And I didn't necessarily do that personally, but yeah.
No, that's the thing is like, would you as an individual have predicted that? Probably not. We're putting the internet hive mind to it.
Yeah.
And so if one person predicts it, you hear about it, and then it's like you predicted it. No, I definitely wouldn't have predicted that myself. I'm not really that good at predicting things that happen on TV shows, to be honest.
Yeah, me too, because I'll follow the emotional threads out as best I can, and then sometimes doesn't where they go.
I will say what kept me from just totally enjoying that moment of the Welcome Again was my personal concern for Tormund and Beric Dondarrion. The way that was shot, it wasn't clear what happened to those guys.
Yeah,
I was like, wait, are Tormund and Beric dead? And they just get no send off? They just die under the wall? They were fine. Thankfully, they were.
Alden Diaz-Backs, yep, this is my main concern with the Ice Dragon. Finally did appear. Was my main guy, Beric Dondarrion, would survive that initial. You got him for a little bit longer and I thought a pretty damn good ending for Beric.
Yeah, he gets a hero send-off in the final.
Yeah. Heath Jones says, my wife had never seen this show, so we watched it all leading up to the final season premiering. After the season 5 finale, she refused to stop watching until she found out what happened next. And that's the power again of Jon Snow, the character in that moment of we got to go get it. We got to find out.
Yeah.
Final discussion about this point here. Season 8. I saw some comments up earlier. Some people really love season 8's ending, which is the final in the show after everything's happened. Again, you might not like it, you might love it, whatever. The final shot, the final sequence is Jon heading back to where it all started. Jon in the woods. I know necessarily, not necessarily you've watched it. That's what I'm trying to say, Lon. You haven't watched it recently. Where do you that ending alone, forget the rest of the season, just that ending. How do you feel about that right now?
I really liked it. I think it felt right, and I think it felt right as the culmination of Jon's journey from the first few seasons, where he was sort of torn between, am I a Stark? Am I a member of the Night's Watch? Am I a wildling? It sort of allowed him to finally make that call and actually follow through with what he felt. And I thought, here's what's interesting. Emilia Clarke recently was talking about how the show wrapped up and how she wasn't a huge fan of all of the decisions D&D made, and one of the ones she took issue with was she felt like Jon, there weren't consequences for Jon. Like he did this horrible thing that he felt like he needed to do, but he didn't ever have to pay a price for it. It's just he did it, it's done, and now he gets to ride off into the sunset. And I didn't really think of it that way.
Yeah.
Going to the north and being a wildling isn't really what he wanted at the beginning of the show. He wanted to be a Stark. He wanted to be part of that family. And that's not how it ends for him. Sansa gets that ending. He doesn't get that. He gets the ending Arya wanted, but it wasn't really his ideal ending. It's kind of like to me, it reminds me very much of Frodo. It's like, I gotta go to the west, it's okay. I'm gonna ride off on this boat with Gandalf, and it's basically it's like a metaphorical death in a way.
I love what you're saying. I love kind of the different interpretations of that, because I always kind of took it as him just kind of F this, y'all made this mess, I did my part, I'm riding off. But also
he's going to the Grey Havens. I mean, that's what it's not. I don't think it's riding off into the sunset happily ever after is that moment to me.
Yeah. He might find himself a good spear wife, and he and Tormund are going to drink all night, and he can sleep in the morning, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, I took it as a nice, again, I think it was Jon's choice, and I liked the choice. And it was discovering his, this might be more who I am than maybe what I wanted. But again, it wasn't the Gungans playing a song at the end of the movie while peaceful. wardrobe is being held off. And that's
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
animated connection to Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I think it does. It does have that. There's a heaviness. There's a melancholy to it of like
Yeah.
his normal life is over too. Like he
Yeah.
did what he had to do, and he made that choice and that sacrifice. And like that now he's gonna like ride off into the wilderness. It's not necessarily like a happy.
Yeah, Mario says John lost Danny, is separated from his siblings now, and so there's some consequences. Yeah,
I take a little bit of issue with Emilia Clarke. So
Yeah.
wonderful actress, did a great job. I take a little bit of an issue with her read.
Yes, I do too, Seth. Yeah, Donald Longsay was tired of fighting and retired.
Retirement. Retirement is like kickback. He could go to Winterfell, get a lazy boy kickback. It's not that. That's a hard life being a wildling living in the far distant north of the wall. Like, come on, it's cold.
Yeah. It's not. It's no
stuff. Like it's not like being a lord in Westeros.
Kyle McDonough says that if Jon is Frodo, does it mean Tormund is Gandalf? Yeah, kind of. Real.
In one way, yeah.
Yeah. Lone Wolfpack says season 8. He likes season 8's ending, but someone who came in on the last season and didn't get to engage with it for all 8 years. Some of the impact was lost on me. It was a nice ending. That's a good point. Alden Diaz comes back with this one, and he says one of the core reasons I love Jon riding off into the north is because it beautifully refuted Thorne's words. You'll be fighting their battles forever. He ended up peacefully proving him wrong. That's a great connection back to Alistair Thorne, one of my favorite Trumps in Game of Thrones. Kind of not that Alistair, like again, Jon not necessarily, Thorne, you're kind of right, so let me go against it, but just kind of works out. I think there's some poetry to that too, of the connection of just like, yeah, you're right. I ain't doing this anymore. I'm gonna go. Right. But Thorne didn't want me to be a tree folk.
But it's not exactly like Thorne's totally wrong either. Like Jon Snow is a bastard. He's an outcast. He's never going to be a part of that world he loved so much, which is what Alistair Thorne was trying to get across to him, like in a crummy, mean-spirited way. But that was kind of the whole message is like, you think you're still like a little lord up here and you're going to like educate all the rest of us, but you're a crow now. You're one of us. You'll never be part of that world. And he was right.
Yeah, you look. You're tapping Stannis. People get, I'll gladly take the jokes at my expense for Stannis. But Thorne is like, I don't think he's wrong at any point. I think he's an a-hole. I think he goes about things the wrong way, and I think he's just got some baggage he's got to drop off, and he pays for it. I even like how he dies. I fought, I lost, I'm dead. Great, but. Yeah, that's one of the things I love. He is not wrong, and when the hour of need arises and Watchers of the Wall, he's there, and at times is treated like a hero. I think even I've talked about his leadership speech to Jon is something I'd put on my wall if I was a boss again. I'm just like, you do it. So yeah, that goes a little bit to me. Goes back to the books, goes back to George of just he's able to create complicated characters.
Well, Thorne is unchanged, like book to show. Like they just brought him along, and like it's just good world building, good, just thoughtful character. Like that's a hard life. That would make you a hard person. That would lend itself to hard people. Like you would be a cold-hearted, pragmatic realist if you were on the Night's Watch. It makes sense to me.
Well, it's like Benjen.
It's harder to turn out like Maester Aemon.
Yeah. Well, it's the difference between oh my gosh, Benjen Stark. And how he's I love Benjen Stark and I love the Starks, but he's very much a Stark. But yeah, he's got no time for Tyrion, and that's understandable.
You're living in a frozen castle at the north of the world, away from all civilization. Everybody's a convict.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like prison.
Mario Part saying lots of people saying the whole Jon being a Targaryen was for nothing, but really had a big impact because it was one of the main reasons Dany turned mad because he refused romance. Yeah, I think. I think, and again, this could be show. We'll see where George takes it. We'll see if he's taking out some whiteout and changing his manuscript right now. But I think Jon being a Targaryen played out to the way I was satisfied in the sense of he didn't want to be king at this point. What he thought he might have wanted changed dramatically, and it goes into a little bit what we're talking there, though.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's that it's so much of what the work that Martin does in Game of Thrones, like so much of the perspective of the whole piece as a whole is like, let's take all of these fantasy tropes and this sort of established way of thinking about these kinds of high fantasy stories and just like turn it upside down. So normally the family, bloodline, heritage, secret, destiny, wedding, like that would be the whole story. Like that's how the Shakespeare play ends, like, well, it turns out you're a princess all along. Like that's what we expect from all of those stories.
Yeah.
And so he takes that and it's like, this character they are secret royalty. They do have this great prophesied destiny. It doesn't work out. It's not to be,
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that take on it. I share that sentiment with you. Not to dig into a little bit, but Eddie Haskell, who's such a great help. So Eddie, I want to get to your question here. You asked it earlier in the show. Says, what are some of the biggest either plot holes or unresolved storylines that you thought they'd get back to, but they didn't? Which might be, some people might consider that Targaryen one unresolved or resolved from a certain point of view, which I think a lot of them are resolved from a certain point of view. The Obi-Wan kind of speech there, but anything that stands out now? This might be a question that takes a little bit more research or rewatching of just things that you were following and didn't get enough of, or got just enough and wanted more.
A thing that I'm curious about in the books, and it as of yet, where I'm reading, it is not yet a going concern.
Okay.
It's Dorne. From a TV viewer's perspective, I feel like we didn't actually ever need to go to Dorne, and that time could have all been like, you could have somebody tell me what happened in Dorne, and I'm like, sure, all right, yeah. Like, and having Oberyn Martell come to King's Landing makes sense. I love that character. He has a great important role to play, but I just don't feel like all of these seasons of cutting away to Dorne, and there's this political intrigue there, and like. Like there's the overthrows and who's king, and we're following like the line of succession, and it doesn't matter at all. There's no payoff. The Jaime adventuring down there with Bronn stuff feels very tacked on and unnecessary, and it's just like they never brought it around to where I needed to care about what was going on in Sunspear.
Yeah.
So it sort of feels like, well, why were we spending time in Sunspear?
It's that stuff that even as someone as myself who just loves to just take everything, present it to me and connect all the emotional canon dots, all the things I do in Star Wars too. But the Dorne stuff, especially because of how it is vast in the books. When you get to book 4 in 20 years, Lon, most of that book is in Dorne, and it is so I think the show couldn't ignore it, and Oberyn Martell comes in and Pedro Pascal comes in, does a great job. I think the show is like,
we gotta go. Dorne out of the story, like don't mention it or whatever. I'm just saying, like, I don't know why we're going there so much.
I just think there's so much that they had to leave on the table. You can't help but kind of feel that. I'm saying is, again, even me, who's just like, yep, I love finding out all stuff there. It's like, yeah, we could have maybe it could have done a little different, or actually, I think even a little more, and the Dornish plot.
Right, make it feel like it connects to everything else. Like I don't begrudge the show spending time in like River Run or whatever. Like some of these places end up, mattering, and it fills out the world. I just don't like Dorne. It seems like was always just kind of the hanging Chad of Game of Thrones. Like, is this what are we doing with this? Is this still a going concern? One, like, I just had it. I'll think of it again if I.
Another plot point. Yeah. Yeah. For me,
I got it.
Yeah, go for it.
We had always talked about, and I mean, especially I think with Melisandre and her religion and the Lord of Light and all that. We spend a lot of time on a lot of these questions of, like the House of White and Black, like what was going on with the faceless men, and like none of that stuff ever gets even explored, not resolved, because it's religion. You're not going to resolve it, but just even like we don't really ever even get to explore any of these mysteries at all. None of it connects to anything else, and it's like that was a little disappointing. You get that hand wavy moment in the final season where they're like, "So what do you think? Is the Lord of Light real?" And it's like, nah, we'll never know. What's the point? Why are you talking about it?
I do agree.
Okay, I guess.
I that's something I really hope George will go into. And I know he says, we won't go to a Shy by the Shadow and all those kind of things, but like, Yeah, getting a little bit more. The Lord of Light. It always seemed to be a little bit of a Lord of Light versus the Great Other, and
Yeah, like who
yeah,
the Varys sorcerer connection. What are there? All these people are hearing these voices in the flames, and
yeah,
it just feels like there was some revelation, like we would get to experience on some level what that's all about.
yeah. Look,
And
I think you and I more than going into season 8. You and I remember having a lot of conversations on and off air about just like Kinvara telling Varys, do you want to know what the voice was telling you? There was a lot of that I think I hyped myself up for.
Yeah, and now I mean, and I get it, and you tease that stuff, and it's always cooler than whatever the revelation would actually be.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but like I was hoping we'd get a little bit more, like of a grand finale in terms of all of that.
Yeah.
And it all is just kind of left like the faceless men. Who knows?
Faceless men, indeed. Yeah, like
the many-faced God, the Lord of Light. Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about that. Yeah, maybe George will release another book just called "The Religions of Game of Thrones" or Westeros and Essos, and he just explains it all.
I mean, I think he's done a really good job of I care because he's done such a good job of shaping all of these different mythologies, and it does feel interconnected. It does feel like these are forces that exist, but you can't quite put your finger on how they work, which is, I mean, that makes sense. Like that's a good metaphor for our actual spirituality on Earth. But it still frustrates me as a reader / viewer on some level. I'm just like, I would like to. Is Melisandre totally full of crap? Was there something like obviously there's some, there's shadow monsters being born, but like, what's the real nature of this power? And is it beneficial to humans, or is this a dark magic? Like even on that level, I feel like we never got an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I love Melisandre's story. Is one of the most her story is to me one of the best, just full circle or wrapped up. But maybe that's some of our answer to your point. But yeah, again, it's left open there a lot. Eddie follows up to his own things. Is one thing I would wanted to see or hear more, but didn't happen. But was talked about is Euron. And by the way, I said Victarion earlier, but it's Euron. Sailed everywhere, seen things you couldn't possibly imagine. Yet the Westeros map, no one knows what. Yeah, this is the great unknown that maybe the journals of Arya Stark traveling west of west is what we'll one day get.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, Euron's a character. I feel like I'm curious to read the book version because it always felt like there was some really good ideas and fun stuff there, and it just never all fully connected. But really, that would be one of my, if I was going to be ranting about the final episode, this would be my number one. And I think we've talked about this on this show before.
Right.
Well, that's a very unsatisfying ending to his story. They just totally throw in there that he has this rivalry with Jaime Lannister.
Right.
We've barely even seen them interact before. It just felt like one of those very much like, let's come in at the end and pretend that this was what this character was all about.
I think you'll enjoy not just Euron, but again, Victarion Greyjoy and just a lot of the other things. Victarion gets way more involved in everything, but I don't. Yeah. I want you to enjoy the Brothers Greyjoy when you get there.
Victarion Greyjoy is he in the show?
No. Euron has Euron. No, Aaron. The Dampere is in it too. He's the other brother, but Victarion and Euron are, Victarion and Euron are kind of squeezed together a little bit. It's again some of the things you got to do when you're taking these books and put them down. We're almost out of here. Some great questions coming in, and we'll be doing more next week. I think generally we'll be trying to record these shows live when possible, trying to get Rachel Cushing on because of her current work schedule. Probably might be doing a broadcast a little bit later on a Saturday. But in a way, Lon, it's easier to get everyone together for these shows thanks to the power we have in our own living room.
It's like the celebrity live streams everybody's doing. Like you can get everybody. Tessa Thompson's just hanging out at home. Just have her call in.
Just have her call in, and maybe you, me, and Ace.
Yeah, I'm telling you, Tessa Thompson's sitting at home right now. Patch her through.
I'll send her the link. Or maybe we'll just edit together us singing Imagine. It'll work out. Lon, thank you so much, as always, for being part of the show, for naming the show. I never want to fail to say that because you created the best name out there for podcasts in the Game of Thrones world. What are you doing right now? What are you working? Can they follow you on anything specific, or is it just some solid Screen Junkies?
No, definitely follow me on Twitter at LONS is my name over there. Especially these days, I'm very chatty, and I have I write a whole newsletter about streaming TV. So if you go to inside.com/streaming, free to subscribe. There is a paid version, but you don't have to sign up for that right away. You can just get it for free. And I write about, not Game of Thrones because it's not on TV. We'll definitely be covering the Fire and Blood Targaryen show. I forget what they're calling it. Year of the Dragon.
Yeah, House of the Dragon. Year of the Dragon won't work, but
a fine film. But so just everything that's going on in the world of streaming TV in the industry. So sign up for that, and subscribe to Screen Junkies.
Do that and follow Lon and his wonderful new adventures over on the Movie Trivia Schmodown. I think the last time I actually saw you, Lon, you were in an alley shooting a scene.
Yes. My character now is the delinquent. And originally, I'd imagine him as like a 50, like Welcome Back, Kotter, or like a 50s high school movie where there's like the guy at the back who's not paying attention, like, oh, he knows where to rub a hose, teach. Like that was my original vision, and I would have like cigarettes rolled up in my sleeve or whatever. But it's sort of, once I mixed up with Christian and Winston, it sort of transformed into this like weird, creepy hobo. So that's where it's sort of at now. Like I look like I'm like riding the rails with like a bindle.
I love it.
Beans right out of the can. Like it's
Carpet
kind of that thing.
It is the best. You always do great stuff. One of the funniest guys out there. Check him out. Follow him at Lons. Thank you to everyone who watched live and anyone listening later on Anchor. Find the podcast. Please listen to it too. Get us some download numbers. But appreciate you guys communicating, watching, interacting with us live. It adds a special element to the show. You can follow me at Ken Napzok. Go to kennapzok.com for information on all the things I do, including my new baseball podcast feed coming out in a couple weeks called Box Score Heroes. And don't forget, you can pick up my book, Why We Love Star Wars, directly from me on the website. Signed copy if you want it. I handle the all the shipping, so give me a couple weeks as we are obviously delayed. That is it for now. We'll see you all next time on Casterly Talk.